recording. We can make it very informal. Basically, it comes down to this. Here's what I thought would be interesting for you in the convention. I had been designing RPG games for a while. For 1996 is when I made my first one, and every time I have made a new game, I have sort of learned some lessons. So some mostly having to do with mechanics, and mostly with having to do with crunch, is what we call it frequently. So I just thought to take you through a history of the artifacts that I have built, over the years for each of the games, and try to explain the rationale for that. And it might be interesting to you to see behind the scenes how does a game transform something which is very natural and very fluid, which is the story and the game and just the process of being there in a different imaginary world, from math. Because in the end we're just talking about stats and dice and all these artifacts that we have to sort of make a conversion. And many of the things that I will show you are things that I learned along the way, especially the earlier ones are things that you're going to find. You're going to see the flaws that I see now with the advantage of, rear view. I forgot how the saying goes. Rear vision is 20/20 or something along those lines. So if you can see my screen now, it says here Destiny. Destiny is the name of the latest game. It uses cards. I want to skip over the fewest ones. So the Fool, that's me. I'm the Fool. The Fool has made a few games. He made a game called Enter the Shadow Side, which was like the professional one. It's about to be replaced. Baxia, near and dear to my heart. So Baxia was a game. It is a game. It's still running. It's an online game, and you can go to Google and type Baxia and just find all about it. And you can probably still join. It's play by post hybrid because it's sort of play by chat also. So each location in the world is a chat room, and players come in and they say, I put on my wizard and robe, etc. Right? So whatever. Fantasia was the first game I made. This is 1996, and it was a time of rebellion. So the Fool has made a couple of things, but at the same time, even though my first experience as a game master figure was 1996, at the same time I've never bought nor read a single RPG book in my life. And the first time I said this to Ando in a private message that we were talking at the beginning, I remember the conversation. Here's what happens. So I grew up in Mexico, if you cannot tell yet by my accent. And at the time that I was growing up, 1996, 1998, there was no role-playing game scene to be heard of, right, in Mexico. I had those little books, the Choose Your Own Adventure books, and that was it. And one day, some guy found me there, and he saw me reading those books, and he said, hey, wouldn't you like to join this thing called Dungeons and Dragons? And I was like, wow, what's Dungeons and Dragons? And that's what I played a total of 3 sessions in Dungeons and Dragons. That's my experience under my belt. I probably had a bad GM, and probably we wouldn't even be here if I had a good GM, because the fact that the GM that I had alienated me is what pushed me into the direction of making my own stuff, which is why I ended up doing. And so what happens is the Dungeons and Dragons used to meet on Saturdays, and they kicked me out because I keep just arguing the GM. And we said, okay, from now on Sundays we're gonna play Fantasia, and I just call it that because of the Never-Ending Story, which is a movie with a flying dog. And Fantasia is played on Sundays. We started in 1996. Amazingly, the campaign is still going. It's 2013 now. And some characters have dropped off and others have come on. But it's like Days of Our Lives. In some way or another, the campaign has kept going every Sunday. So I'm very proud of that. I left the country in 1999 to come to the United States. I got a job offer, so not illegal. And when I left my gaming party in Mexico, I still had the crave to just play role-playing games. And that's how I created this thing called Baxia. And that's the online one. So it's the same version as Fantasia. Baxia was awesome for a while, and then I got the bug. I thought that I had a shot at making screenplays in Hollywood because some producers started buying my stuff. And that is another story for another tale, because it was a huge life lesson, right? So we're just gonna leave all that later. And out of those lessons, however, I came back with what it was called Enter the Shadow Side, which was originally a pitch for a production, DreamWorks, I believe. I forgot. The point is, it never went anywhere. Don't. But I took everything that I had created in order to create Enter the Shadow Side. So let's start talking about systems, right? And this goes to my first experience in creating Fantasia. And this is like what we can talk about here. Crunch is the name of the title. It comes down to this. We're trying to tell a story, right? In the end, we're trying to tell a story. And many times that story can have different ways in which it can fork into the future. So it can be that a person thinks, okay, my paladin is going to fight your orc, and they both swing their swords and they both hit each other, and somehow we have to make a decision who is hitting who and who is damaging who. And I call that bonk. Is a silly term, bonk. And bonk is the who hits who and the how hard it hurts is at the core of all the systems that we have, right? So the bonk of D&D was very, very simple. There was one dice that said you roll these dice first to see if you hit the other guy, and that's with the armor class, right? And to hit armor class 0, I'm talking 1996. And there was another dice that said, okay, now you hit the orc, now how much did you hurt them, right? So I had a lot of problems with that system, and that's why I was kicked out of the D&D group, because I made uncomfortable questions. I said, wait a minute, you mean to say that having a better armor makes you harder to hit? Isn't that like wearing a bulletproof vest saying that you can now dodge bullets? Isn't the bulletproof vest supposed to stop them, isn't it? You already got hit, but now you have a pet. So I was a nightmare for the game master to be in, but I had a point. I thought I did. Why did we, for instance, why did Dungeons and Dragons say a club, right, a just big stick that you hit you with it, is always going to be, I think it was a D6 of damage, right? What if you have an awesome helmet? Or what if it's a really big orc? Or what is a tiny, small goblin? There are rules for all that, and you have to look them up. But I was looking for something that we could consider universal. And what I am trying to think right now is how can I draw a graphic here that shows you what I mean. Here's what I'm going to do. Give me just 1 second. I'm going to take you to the board and show you exactly what I mean. Here we are. I'm one of those guys who has a board in the house. And let's see how well can we draw here. So we're going to have we're going to have a graph here that goes from easy to hard, right? And from easy to hard. And on this axis of the graph, we're going to put the difficulty of the actions that you're doing. So some actions are really easy, like I said, the club to the head, right? So this is club. That's super easy. Some actions start to get a little more complex. Now you have a grapple. Now you have a grapple with magic weapons. Now you have to start rolling saving throws. And the more elaborate is your action, it's going to go up in this scale. And this other scale down here is going to be what you need to know as far as rules to be able to determine if that action succeeds or fails. So at the very easy level, it's simple. It's, roll against armor class and then roll your hit dice, right? D6 for the club. So it's easy. But then you start to go into, okay, now we need to consider your class and your skills, and let's go to appendix, blah, 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 of this book or that book. And what starts to happen is that you get a line sort of like this, right? And the easy stuff you can deal with very easily. You just roll a dice and you're done. Whereas the more elaborate stuff, the more complex stuff, requires you to sort of know, which page of the book you're on and the supplement that came out, and it starts to get, right? So here's the danger. In this area over here, I'm just gonna write it here. Be lawyers. Like in the maps of all, right? And this is the area where it starts to get iffy. Whereas this area over here, the area where stuff is easy, here be fun, right? Because here at this point, nobody is stopping the game to go look up something in a book, right? And we're just moving forward, rolling dice, and the story is king, which is the premise that I'm going with, that the story is always king. So I'll go back to this board, by the way, at some point. So what I did in 1996 as sort of an act of rebellion is to kind of talk to everybody at the party and say, listen guys, we're going to play something that is going to be all the cool stuff that you have in D&D, but it's going to have rules that make sense, and you won't have to look them up in a book. So let me make a caveat here. The first game of many game designers is almost always, from what I observed, an act of rebellion against D&D. D&D specifically, because D&D is so successful and so admirable and so worthy of praise that you look at it and you say, wait a minute, if this thing is so successful and is ruling the combat as a D6, I could do something better. And then you have all these D&D clones, and I'm guilty of that. Fantasia was, let's do D&D better. And that's usually everybody's first game when you're a designer. It's D&D but better. And so here's what we did for Fantasia, and I have it on the screen if you can still see it. It says here, here's how we're going to deal with a combat, right? We're going to have a strength stat that is going to determine how hard you hit, and we're going to have a constitution stat that's going to determine how much pain you can take, right? Then we're going to put together the weapon, which is what you use to hit, with your strength, and we're going to keep that on one half of the equation. And then we're going to put together your constitution and your armor, which is what you use to take up damage, and we're going to put that on the other half of the equation. And once we have the two, we're going to compare them, right? So that way we got rid of all the questions like, what is if it's a big orc or a small orc? You just auto-reduce strength. What if it's a big club or a small club? You just auto-reduce the weapon, right? What if it's an armor? What if it's not an armor? And then you could throw bonuses. Like, what if it's really angry? Then you could give the attacking side an extra 2. Or what if it's really important that the guy is thinking of his dead grandmother and he's defeating with his shield, right? So then you give bonus to the other side. So it was a universal system. You didn't have to look up exceptions anymore. But the question was, and let's go to the next page over here, but what is the role? What is the role? So what we have done so far is that we have summed up everything into two sides of the equation. We have two forces, an attacking and a defender. How do we interact them? How do we make them, come down to a dice? The answer is this. It says here, think about it. If the two forces are even, right? So if you have two twins who are wearing the same armor and are wearing the same sword, and they have exactly the same skills, and they both hit each other, what are the chances that one guy will hit the other? The answer is obvious. It's 50-50. Right? So if the forces are even, then the chances are 50-50. If one force is bigger than the other, then it starts to get 60-40, it starts to get 70-30. So thinking that, we made their first formula here. And the formula to roll the minimum dice is very simple. Is this. The force that resists, you subtract from it the force that is acting, in this case the attacker, and then you add half your dice, whatever is your dice. Right? So if you're using a d20, you add 10. So look at this, for example, right? So imagine that a force that resists is worth 5 points. And in our stats, we're going to consider that weak. And imagine that the force that is attacking is 10 points. In our stats, we're going to consider that strong. And imagine that at the table, we're using all d20s. Right? So half the dice is a 10. So the way it works out is 5 minus 10 equals minus 5. Plus half the dice equals 5. 5 on a d20. So the attacker, who is twice as strong as the guy who is taking the hit, needs to roll a 5 or better in a d20. So he has 3 out of 4 chances to win. And that felt not reasonable. And if you start playing with these numbers, they become equal. Like if it was exactly equal numbers, then 10 minus 10 is 0, plus 10 is 10, and that's half the dice. Technically it should be 11, but forgive me, an error of 1. That was the formula, right? So given that formula, we created the first game, and this was the first game. It was Fantasia. So let me show you what the what the sheet looked like for the game master, and this is in Spanish because we did this in Mexico, but it's very easy to interpret here. So let's see, Control plus makes it big, not that big, okay, a little bigger. So what you see here is a table, because I didn't want to be doing math in my head the whole time, and we were using dice of 30, right? Not a D20, it's D30, 30 was our total dice. And I can tell you how we did that, because they didn't sell D30 dice, it was actually an invention of necessity. Regardless, the half of a D30 was 15. So as you can see, equal forces always meet at 15. But the moment one force, let's say this 6, is bigger than the other force, let's say this 5, then they need to roll a little less, right? 13. But if they're going to go against the 7, if this 6 is going to go against the 7, then he needs to roll a little more, which is 18, right? And this worked okay most of the times for forces that were mostly even, right, within the same range. Like you have a 5 versus a 10, or a 20 versus a 15. This did not happen. So as I said, the game has been running since 1996, and they keep getting experience points. They are demigods by now. Long gone are the days where they had 20s, right? So if I look what started to happen here. See what's going. I mean, I look, it's all 30, unless you go down here, because down here is look what's going on over here, right? So that was a problem, right? A character, they kept growing, and we had rules which allowed you to cast magic in a way that it would accumulate on itself and just keep growing exponentially. Very soon we were just dealing with crazy numbers. But that was Fantasia, and we sort of liked it, and we sort of used this sheet for everything. And as you can see, the values in this sheet are always going, from 1 to 30. And that was try number 1. And we had our rules over here, by the way. Since we have them, it doesn't matter. That was try number 1. That was Fantasia, the first game. So let's see how it evolved. By the way, I want to show you the character sheet just for kicks, right? So this was the character sheet. We had a score for magic and another score for combat, and then we have all these stats. And these stats, interestingly, are still used by Enter the Shadow Side, because they are sort of balanced, and we use them in Baxia. I'm just going to show you very basically what they are. Everything on the right side of this wheel is physical, and everything on the left side of this wheel is sort of spiritual, mental, metaphysical. And what you see here is that every 3 traits, they have a relationship within each other. So this one, Vida, that means life, that's health, right? So that's your health points. Resistance, that's resistencia, that's how hard you are to hit, that's your endurance. And in between these two, you have health. So we said health is the combination of life and resistance. And complexion is the combination of resistance and strength. Agility is the combination of strength and dexterity. Reflexes is the combination of dexterity and mind. Conscience apparently is spirit and mind. Presence, like charisma, like sort of presence actually, not charisma. Presence is the combination of charisma and spirit. And beauty is charisma and life. So they sort of relate amongst themselves, right? So that was a good thing. We brought it over for Baxia. But the point that I was making is that before we have this giant table of numbers, and in Baxia I needed to make a certain evolution, right? So Baxia is the system that I made online as soon as I left Mexico, and I just took everything I knew from Fantasia and I just dumped it into a chat room, right? Basically a chat room system. Small parenthesis about that. Baxia gave me my job. I earn a living today in all things computer. And this was in my resume. This is the reason I was hired. This is the reason why I was brought over in 1999. So in a weird way, I owe, the stability, the house that I have, to having started games once upon a time, right? So anyway, this is the improvement that Baxia made over that table, and it's a little bit hard to understand. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to move right on to the next one, because it's exactly the same thing. It's here and enter the shadow side. Just notice this. In this table over here, let me see, where is the... In this table over here, we have one axis that goes from 0 to 100, and we have another axis that goes the opposite, right, from 100 in the bottom to 0. And then we have this sort of line that is crossing, and we have values that go from 10 to 100. So what I can tell you is that everything that we had seen in the giant table here is contained in this sliding scale here, plus more. And I'll explain how that works, because I use that same table for enter the shadow side. And at this point I'm going to click on the link. Actually, so when you buy the shadow side book, you get this big sheet that you're supposed to print, and but this is an online version of it, right? So it's the same scale. It goes from low to high, and then from low to high. And it says over here on the left side is might, on the right side is difficulty. We went over this. When we added the strength of the guy to the club of the weapon, we were talking about might. And when we were talking about the resistance, right, the constitution of the guy who is being hit, plus his armor, we were talking about difficulty. Basically, this means force 1 versus force 2, and it can be any force. And what we're trying to find out is what is the minimum dice roll that force 1 needs in order to beat force 2, right? So if my force 1, I'm just going to make it up, if it's 12, where did the 12 come from? Who cares? Maybe it's 6 from the weapon and 6 from the strength, and then I gave him a bonus. Doesn't matter. My attacking strength is 12. How much do I need to roll in a d20 in order to beat, I don't know, give me a number, a 10, right? So here's what I do. I go to the 12. Do you see the red line? I'm just dragging with the mouse, and it goes over the 10, and it's crossing over the 9. I need to roll a 9. That's it, I'm done. I need to roll a 9 on the d20. So let's test this, right? What if we have equal forces? What if I have a 7 versus a 7? On a d20, they should have equal chances, right? So here's the first 7, here's the second 7, and there we go. It crosses right through the 11. So it works. It's equal chances, right? Now let's make it double. What if I'm going against someone who's twice as high as me, right? So let's go a 7 versus a 14. So here's the 7, and here's the 14. And it says I need a 16 or more. Let's see if that is always true when you are going against someone who's twice your superior, right? Instead of doing 7 versus 14, let's do 5 versus 10. It's the same proportions. Exact same proportions. Will it give us a 16 again? Let's find out. So here's the big 5, big giant 5, and here's the big giant 10. So let's go over here, and let's go over here. Same 16. Right? Or let's go, I don't know, let's go 3 versus 6. So here's the big 3, here's the big 6, same 16. It works any way you want. I mean, pretty much, I don't know, 11 versus 22. 11, let's grab the small 11 here, 22 here, 16 again. So this mathematically works in proportions. Remember how in the giant table that I had before, we had gone to the thousands and to the hundreds, because it was just, so this, we made it for scalability. If you have something crazy like 627 versus 200, right? You could easily say, you know what, that's the same as a 6 versus a 2, basically. So just grab 6 versus 2, give me a 5 or more, boom. Right? So this Jacob's ladder is kind of cool. Here's the other thing. It also makes it so it doesn't matter who's rolling the dice. In other words, if you are the 6 and your opponent is the 12, so it's here, right? So let's go 6 versus 12. Then you need a 16 or more. That means that you have how many chances to succeed? One, oh, I'm touching the screen with my fingers. If you could see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 chances to win in a D20, and 15 chances to lose. Right? Let's let the other guy do the roll. The other guy with the 12 against your 6. Right? So I'm gonna go over here to the 12 against my 6, and it gives him a 6 or more. How many chances of win does he have? He has the same 15. And how many chances of lose he has? The same 5. In other words, I have 5 chances to win and 15 to lose. He has 15 chances to lose and 5 to win. Actually, zero error. Point is, it doesn't matter who makes the roll, the proportions are always the same. So this was the system for Enter the Shadow Side, and this is what I published, and it got some reviews. This thing, they didn't have a name for it. So when we were trying to sell the product in the Drive-Thru RPG, and we were trying to find a category for the system, there really wasn't any. And then we went to RPG Geek, and finally someone there came up with the idea. They say, this is a nomogram. And I said, okay, I'll take it. I don't know what a nomogram is. But so this is Enter the Shadow Side is sort of my call to fame, because we started, it's the only system that uses a nomogram to resolve conflicts this way. And I thought it was okay. And I thought I had reached like the pinnacle. Let me show you, by the way, before I forget, the character sheet for Enter the Shadow Side. It also got some accolades. It's the same thing that we had in Fantasia. Remember how I mentioned to you that endurance and strength together give you constitution? Right, same deal, right? Life and endurance give you health, and charisma and life give you beauty. It's the same thing. I just put some runes here. And this was the character sheet. I'm very proud of it. So Enter the Shadow Side, I thought, that's it, I'm done, this is the best game, it could never get better. And then I started to ask myself, really, is that, because here's what happens. See, we did it, the perfect system. Here's what happens. There are three kinds of games that you can have. And some of you are probably familiar with this division, because it's not mine. I mean, someone before me made up this division. There are some games, the first category, sports-like. And what it means is that you're playing those games because you want to win, right? That's your objective. So how you win is all about the strategy, and it's about knowing, which tools you have at your disposal, and just playing the game, knowing all the rules. Your objective, however, is to win. And then you have the simulationist game, and I have no patience for those. I mean, not to knock them down. Some people love them. Simulationist game, they care about just representing realistically what is happening in this fantastic world. So if you have to spend 5 minutes rolling dice to determine the exact weight of your sword compared to the exact resistance of the chainmail, then you're happy to do that because you want a perfect simulation. I respect that. It's not my cup of tea. I respect it. Finally, this is what I do like, narrative games, right? So here in the end, all we care about is the story. And this is when I started having questions and doubts about Enter the Shadow Side, because I asked myself, I mean, narrative games, what do I really need to tell a story? Do I really need 14 stats? And do I really need 14 stats that have to average amongst themselves? So in other words, where you're doing your calculations, you basically need a calculator. And so not just the stats, the skills also, they had points. And every single time you had to do math, because even though Jacob's Ladder, which is the one I show you with the line, even though it's very simple and it's very universal, you still need to invest some time in adding up all the forces. Adding up all the forces in the left side, which is the stat, plus your weapon, plus your skill, if you have any, plus a bonus, right? So that's one sum. And then all the other thing for the other guy, and then you finally get a roll. All that to tell a story, tracking HP and MP. So this was a moment for me where I said, it's time to change the paradigm, and I came up with something called Destiny. And Destiny is nothing like this. And this is what I was alluding at the beginning. When I created Fantasia, I was just trying to make a better D&D. And when I created Baxia, I was just trying to take the best things out of Fantasia. And I created Shadowside is like the best things out of Baxia and Fantasia, plus the movie ideas that didn't work out with the producer. But all of that was a progression in a single path, a single paradigm that I never even challenged. And I never even thought of challenging. So it was until I started really asking myself, how can I tell a story, and do I really need all this thing around it? So Destiny's mechanics are best told through something I call Byron's story. So let me see if I can just show you that over here. I wonder if I can make it a little bit larger. A quick walk through Destiny. So this is Byron Bacchus, you can see it over here. He's a character that I had once upon a time in another comic book, right? And this is sort of like a handout that I plan to give to people to explain how Destiny works and how Destiny is so different, right? So the first thing that I want you to know about Destiny is character creation, right? So there are only 4 traits. We don't have strength and charisma and mind and health and beauty, and we don't have 14 things anymore. We just have 4. We have combat, magic, influence, and literally everything else. Everything that's not magic, combat, or influence. That's the 4 traits that we have. So hacking, driving cars, painting, we don't care. That's everything else, right? So character creation is very simple, right? We say, for your character, pick one thing that's going to be your strength, and pick one thing that's going to be your weakness, and that's it. You're done, right? So Byron is going to pick. He's going to make his strength. Let's see, is magic. Okay, it's going to be his strength, and influence is going to be his weakness. Done, right? So we're playing with cards. So cards means that I use the hearts. These are like poker cards. You can buy them in Walmart for $1. So the hearts mean magic. The clubs here mean everything else. The swords mean combat, and the diamonds mean influence, right? So Byron picked magic as his strength, so he gets 3, and he picked influence as his weakness, so he gets only 1, and for the other 2 he just gets 2. So this is his hand. That's Byron's hand, right? And we're done. We're done with character creation. So everybody else has their own hands, and then the story begins. And the story, if you're familiar with Enter the Shadow Side, is not exactly a novel idea. It says that there is this parallel dimension where ghosts live, etc. And so the story goes about Byron finds a ghost, and the ghost is going to teach him how to fly. And then when it comes to the time to do a trade check is when we bring this table, right? So if you notice here, the cards, somebody wrote with a Sharpie, certain words like easy and yes, and over here it says hard. And what happens is that we have this table down here. So at the point where the story host, which is what we call the game master, tells a character, okay, this creepy girl is teaching you how to fly. Can you do it? Can you do it? So flying is a magic action over here. And then he says here that it's going to be easy. So that means that if I have a heart that is at least a 5, a 6, or a 7, I just lay it on the table, and that's my answer. Yes, I can. Right? So bingo, it says here, one of my 3 magic cards is a 7 of heart, which means yes and for easy. So there are 6 possible flavors of answers in the cards. They can say yes, yes and, yes but, or no. And the no can be no but or no and. So what happens is he gave me a trade check. I answered by saying yes and now the story host is interpreting that yes and to say yes, you can fly, and it's so cool that you can go really fast and you have a great time or whatever, right? So that's basically what happens. Instead of rolling a dice, you have in your hands the set of cards that determine whether you succeed or not. So that means that sometimes in your hands you're going to have a no. It's just going to be there sometimes. And sometimes when the story host says, can you hit this guy? Can you break this door? Can you climb this wall? You're going to be forced to say, no, I can't. And that's okay, because a narrative game is not about winning. A narrative game is about telling a story. So sometimes in failing to break the door, in failing to climb the wall, in failing to hit the guy, maybe you achieve something that you wouldn't have achieved otherwise if you just keep winning all the time because you're a demigod. And I believe that in failing there is power and there is potential there to tell a good story through failing, just as much as there is through succeeding, right? So everything else is very easy. I'll just you can find this small card in reddit.com/r shadowside, so we don't have to get bogged down by it, and I can go back to the story. But basically, what I'm trying to do with Destiny is break the paradigm. It says here, unifying the language through the death of the middleman. So story host free to focus on story. Unifying the language. There are two languages that are used at the table at all times. There is the language of math, and there is the language of narrative. Right? In the language of math, it says you had a strength of 18, he had a constitution of 15, you needed to roll 13 or more. All those are numbers. They need to be translated into actual story. They need to be translated into saying, yes, you swing your sword and you hit the guy over the head and he bleeds and he falls to the ground. There is a translation that needs to happen, and we are usually looking at the game master to make that translation for us, and that is a great burden to have. If we didn't have to use math in the first place, then we wouldn't have to make a translation. That's what you just said. So here is how Destiny uses math. I mean, in the first place, doesn't use math in the first place. Difficulties. Instead of saying difficulties could be any number from 1 to 100, there is just three kinds of difficulties. Things are easy or not so easy or hard. There is no need to translate it. It's already traits, right? So we used to say, if you have a great strength, then you're probably very effective at combat, right? That was a trait. Now, no, we just say combat. Why are you good at combat? Whatever you pick your reason. Maybe you think like Sherlock Holmes if you saw the movie that he's planning how he's going to beat the guy, or maybe you're just really tall or really strong. It doesn't matter. What matters in the end is that you're good at combat. So your traits are combat, magic, influence, and everything else. Trait levels. Either you're weak or you're average or you're strong. And skills and items, either you have them or you don't. There are no numbers anywhere. And there is no math anywhere. So a trait check for determine win or lose. So let me give you a peek here, or what the cards are going to look like. I have here Destiny cards. So the back of the cards for each trait is going to look sort of like this. This is our combat card. So all it tells you is that it's a combat card. This one is everything else. This one is influence, and that one is magic. And when you flip the card over, this is what happens when you get a no. Sometimes you lay that on the table, that means you fail. Sometimes you lay this on the table, that means you succeed, right? So obviously you can only succeed for actions which are at the same level of difficulty or lower. Right? But that's what the cards look like, and these are for the players to determine whether they win or lose. And for the story host, we want to use something called tarot. So let me just show you very, very basic, what does that look like. If I go up here, and tarot has major and minor arcana. So the minor arcana, I'm not going to get too much into it, is just 7 sets, which are crosses and doves and eyes and fates. We're just making it up, and it has various values in it, like this is the ace, deuce, there's a tray somewhere, there it is. Jack, that's 4. See how the animal is getting slightly more menacing here, all the way until king, right? This queen, jack, etc. That's the minor arcana. The major arcana is actually symbolisms. So the teacher, the vagrant, the dying man, the sovereign, I don't know if old soldier. There's like 23 of these, right? And the idea here is that if you're a story host, you can just draw these cards whenever you need inspiration, and whenever you want to see what's going to happen next, you just bring this card up, and it says, okay, the sovereign, right? So that means you're meeting someone from the government and he has a mission for you. And what is the mission about? The magician, there is a magical artifact that they detected somewhere, and how are you going to get it? The space under the bed. This card usually means there are secrets or there are things that you don't know. So maybe it's classified, Agent Smith. You'll find out how you get that magical item. And then, done. You're done. Said, go do your story. Right? So that's what we're trying to do for Destiny. Eliminate all the math. Eliminate all the numbers. Do everything directly in English. Make the game a narrative. And, last thing I want to say, we're short on time. The difference between story host and storyteller and game master is in the name itself, right? So the game master is the master of the game. He is making decisions. He is taking an active role in being your antagonist in a healthy way, right? Not necessarily in a bad way. He wants to see you lose, but he is there to actively give you a challenge. The storyteller he's the teller of the story. It's not as much of a game anymore. Now it's more on the story side. So there is less win-lose thing, and there is more story, going on. But still, he is the teller of it. He is there to tell you a story, and you're participating to some degree. The story host is like the host of a party. It's like when you go to a party, you show up and you try to have a good time, and the host is there, and he's not gonna tell you what to do. He just wants you to enjoy yourself, and he's watching. And if you get drunk, he'll kick you out. Exactly, that's like Andro. So a story host is a little bit more hands off in the sense that he doesn't tell you what to do. You can do whatever you want, but he's very hands on in the sense that he's going to give you consequences to your actions. And that's the philosophy we have for the story host. So we're trying to do all of that. Seeing, you know what, I'm not even gonna get into seeing. This is like, we need to be high to understand this stuff. The concept of renouncing your authority as character and story creation and controller, right? And becoming instead a powerless but inspired observer. Here's all I will say about it. If you have ever played a game where you have had a character and this character became very close to you, became so close to you in fact, that he started making decisions apparently on his own. You knew as a player that he was doing something incredibly stupid, but he had to do it, and he did it. He walked into that cave and fought that dragon. He challenged that necromancer. And probably he died, and probably you knew he would, but you had to be true to him. It's almost like that character wasn't your creation anymore. It wasn't your puppet anymore, isn't it? He almost had a life of his own. He almost had something that you respected, that you ended up respecting, even though outside of the game, meta game, you knew it was going to end up bad for him. You were probably seeing. And I just call that seeing. It goes for story host too. And let me tell you, as a story host is great. Because if I'm a game master and I kill your character, I'll probably feel bad about it. Especially if I know that you care about that character and you spend who knows how long investing. If I kill it, it's my responsibility. If I'm seeing, I don't care. If I'm seeing I didn't kill your character, the necromancer did it, or the dragon did it, or the orc did it, and I had nothing to do with placing that orc there or the dragon there, it was not my fault. In fact, I can cheer for you, I can root for you, not like I can help you anyway. And when you lose, I will grieve with you because you are my buddy, right? So seeing is great. It frees you from guilt and from responsibility and allows you to enjoy the game almost as if you were a player. So anyway, it's been a long time. The game is gonna come out anytime soon. It's gonna use a bunch of cards, and it's 9:45. We've been here 50 minutes, so. Thanks everybody for listening. We can use whatever time, Ando, you think is appropriate if anybody has questions. But that's basically all I wanted to show you. You know what? I almost cannot hear you. It sounds like a voice astronaut. Okay. You know what? I'll be there in person next year, if everything goes well. Here I am promising things again. That's what got me in trouble the first time. I don't learn. I don't learn my lesson. I'll try my best. Let's leave it at there. All right. Well, gentlemen. Thank you. Enjoy the rest of the convention. Take care. Take care. Bye-bye.
That's it?
Yeah. Almost an hour.
Why didn't you watch them?
Watch them what?
Huh?
Why did